let me remind everybody that we're still in session. The meeting, we didn't adjourn the meeting. This is still a member of the BBG board meeting. And as I mentioned before, we took the break back in December of 2013. Shockingly, back in 2013, VOA did the first deep dive under our new format. Since then, we've heard from all the different entities, and David's had the ability to watch what's worked and which doesn't work. So now we get the second newly improved deep dive on Voice of America. As always, what we'll do is, I think, David, you have about a 40, 45-minute presentation, and then we will open it up to questions from the board or comments from the board. So, David, why don't you take it away?
Thank you, Chairman Schell, and governors, especially new ones. It's a real pleasure to be with you today, and thank you for this opportunity to talk to you about the work of the Voice of America, particularly in the last 15 months since I last reported to you. When I did that 15 months ago, it was a solo performance down in a studio. Today, I'm very happy to be up here and to have some ringers with me. I'm not going to be doing this alone. I have some wonderful colleagues from VOA who will help me present the work that we've done over the last year. We're going to focus on several areas of our work, but of course, job one is covering the news in a way that's relevant to our audience, in a way that has impact. So we decided to start with one story in particular. Last August, Islamic State militants, or some might say thugs, attacked civilians in northern Iraq, chasing as many as 40,000 people up onto a mountain. The people were surrounded. It was cold. They were in desperate circumstances. There was no water, very little food. This is where the drama played out, here in northwestern Iraq, right near the Syrian border, in the province of Nineveh, which is the home of the biblical Jonah. Many on that mountain at that time were from the Yazidi community, the minority of Kurds known as the Yazidis, but there were also Christians and other Muslims who refused to submit to Islamic State extremism. With what was left on their dying cell phones, some of the people up there started to make phone calls. And one of the people they called and reached was Dakil Elias of VOA's Kurdish service. Dakil, please join me.
Good morning. Every call last August was a call of desperation. To those stranded on Mount Sinjar, VOA Kurdish was a link to the outside world in what many believed were their final hours alive.
The ISIS advance was relentless. Kurdish fighters called VOA saying they were running out of ammunition. VOA's job was to get the world's attention.
I reached a woman held prisoner in a school by ISIS. I heard screaming. What's happening? I asked. They are dragging girls by force, she said. They say you have to become a Muslim. Please help us get out of here. She begged for the school to be bombed, even if it meant her death.
In December, VOA Kurdish stringer Zana Omar was among the first to reach the Sinjar region and send us this exclusive footage. People were scattered all over the landscape. Witnesses said 10 to 15 children died each night on Mount Sinjar from the cold and lack of food and water. He found refugee children clutching stuffed animals they'd received from aid workers. In some cases, they had nothing else. Last week, VOA Jerusalem correspondent Scott Bobb went to Iraq to find some of the few women who escaped ISIS, including Salah Hussein.
Each fighter brought a girl for himself. They came to buy and sell us and convert us to Islam. They raped us and didn't give us food. No one was spared.
Hussein escaped in November. She says she wants to testify to the International Court of Justice about what was done to her and her people. Scott Bobb, VOA News, Badra, northern Iraq.
Our VOA Kurdish service stringers were also there at the liberation of Kobani in January. They shared their video with VOA's Elizabeth Arrett of Central News.
5 months after Islamic State fighters laid siege to the Syrian border town, they've been routed, but at a devastating cost. From streets to homes to the very means of hope, destruction is everywhere. Kobani is part of the blood-soaked puzzle in a region torn asunder by competing forces. And even this battle is not yet over. The Islamic State acknowledged its retreat, but its forces remain on the outskirts, and they vow to return. Inside Kobani, Kurdish fighters vow to keep them out. For Khadijan Farkin in Kobani, Elizabeth Arrett, VOA News.
For me, as a Kurd and as a member of the Yazidi religious minority in Iraq, with the family and friends directly affected by the horrible attacks of Islamic State, the past 7 months have been the most difficult and devastating time of my entire life. However, as a journalist and a reporter for Voice of America, the only in Kurdish service, the only international broadcasting source in Kurdish, along with my colleagues, I had to take the lead in connecting my people to the entire Kurdish community and to share their stories with the world, specifically the American people and the US government. Via VOA platform, I was able to deliver messages that I was getting from local fighters that were still fighting ISIS around Sinjar, from little girls that were kidnapped by ISIS and kept hostage, like the one we just heard. Listen to how she was terrified, asking for help. And from our regular audience and experts, those messages were a cry for a more American airstrike on ISIS. This was the best to stop ISIS from advancing. It did, and it continues. Just yesterday, our stringer in Syria, Zana Omar, took a VOA camera to Serikanye, where also Kurdish fighters are fighting ISIS. He was able to zoom in and provide us with a closer look of ISIS militant. This was after reporting the liberation of Kobani weeks ago. Again, for me, as a Kurd and as a member of the Yazidi religious minority, as much as I was shocked by the ruthless attacks by ISIS against my people, as much I was shocked by the videos showing militant selling and slaving little girls, some of them members of my friends' families, as much as I was shocked by the mass killing of hundreds of boys in Kobani village, those I was talking to days before their mass killing by ISIS militants. My colleague and I made it priority via VOA platform to make sure the stories of these innocent people reached to the international community. And nowadays, VOA Kurdish is the stage to share those horrific stories of the young girls with the world, stories of girls that were able to escape from ISIS, girls that were gifted to ISIS leaders in Fallujah, others who were sold to people in Mosul and Raqqa and other places in Iraq and Syria. I can tell you, voices of several of them were aired on the VOA Kurdish, posted on the web and TV programming. Throughout these unfortunate events, our team at Voice of America continues to be the voice of these innocent victims of these atrocities committed by this group who are enemies of our country and the rest of the world. Voices that, in Kurdish, can only be heard on Voice of America. Thank you.
Thank you, Dakhil. This is just one example of VOA's impact in the past year on a story. And this is a story that prompted President Obama to order the U.S. bombing of the ISIS forces around the mountain and to build an international coalition against ISIS. Back in August, as he mentioned, Dakhil was very much on the story, and he was twice called to the White House to meet with the President's Deputy National Security Advisor, Ben Rhodes, and others as they were discussing how best to respond. And they wanted firsthand information on what was going on. And 4 days after his second meeting, the bombing of the ISIS positions began. Mr. Chairman, for the people on Mount Sinjar, VOA made a difference, as it does worldwide, in so many ways every day. You, Mr. Chairman, at our last deep dive, asked me a question. It was a pointed one, but it was a good one. And at this point, I'd like to just add a little bit to my answer 15 months ago. You asked me, what should VOA's role be, as contrasted perhaps, for example, with a surrogate broadcaster? And I've thought about it since, and I'd like to add this to the answer I gave you. Only VOA is America's international state broadcaster, our state broadcaster. That fact alone brings with it enormous prestige and enormous clout. It opens doors. It's why the government in Myanmar let us on Myanmar state radio teaching English. It's why the government in Mali, when I was visiting that country, gave me the keys to the best FM transmitter in Bamako. And it is why we are grudgingly allowed to have 2 journalists in an official bureau in Beijing. Here in the United States, there is no state broadcaster on the air. And most of our fellow citizens may not really understand the concept and the power of it. But believe me, most of the rest of the world does. We are America's BBC. We are America's Deutsche Welle. It's Radio France Internationale. We're a force multiplier for the considerable soft power of our country. Now, according to the most recent data, we reach 172 million people a week at Voice of America, all around the world, on television, radio, internet, mobile devices, and social media in nearly 50 languages. This is how that audience breaks down by distribution platform. Our mission: to combat ignorance, propaganda, and anti-Americanism with programming that is relevant to audiences about their regions, the United States, and the world. And best of all, we do it not with propaganda, but by honoring our own values as enshrined in our Constitution, by exporting First Amendment journalism that is independent and honest. VOA is the international state broadcaster of a confident nation that sees truth as its best ally. Now, some of the most exciting developments that have taken place at Voice of America in the 15 months are in social media, digital and mobile journalism. I mentioned that I'm sharing the presenting duties here today with a number of VOA's best and brightest. Adia Stuti of the Indonesian service was supposed to be joining us, but she's not well today. However, Matt Bays, head of digital for VOA, is here. And so, Matt, why don't you come up and join us and tell us about some of the things that are going on in this very important part of our world.
Thank you. So I think everyone here understands why social media matters. You get that some people will just never come to your website, so you have to meet those audiences where they are and try to capitalize on those audiences on different platforms. So let's start with the Khmer service at VOA. So they are a monster on Facebook. They have close to 1.4 million fans. And they are actually independently ranked as the single biggest Facebook page in Cambodia. And on top of that, about 90% of the fans that they have are under the age of 34. So they have a large, young, influential, connected audience in a country that matters to us, in a country that's pretty much obsessed with Facebook. So what do you do with that audience? How are we capitalizing on that audience? So one of the things that we really focus on is pushing people back and forth to radio and television. So we reinforce our broadcast. But perhaps most importantly, the service regularly talks about China's push for a stronger role in the region and what that means for a country like Cambodia. So when it comes to China, we got some very good news this year. In one of the most challenging media markets in the world, our Mandarin service managed to build an audience that is 75% under the age of 35. And that's in a market that's fairly old. And that's according to the most recent BBG survey. Now, that survey shows that our audience in China is 8 times larger than it was in 2009, thanks to our digital content in Weishi, our digital satellite TV broadcast in Mandarin, Tibetan, and Cantonese. About 24 million Chinese were part of VOA's audience during the last year. Now, social media played a huge role in that as the single most effective method of dealing with censorship. Why demand that Chinese citizens jump the firewall when we can tunnel inside and talk to them directly on the platforms that they prefer? And it's working really well. VOA original programming is pulling in huge audiences on the Chinese equivalent of YouTube. One of our Mandarin service staffers gets more than 2 million views per week just to her English teaching lessons alone. Now, this is a public meeting and is probably not the best venue to discuss exactly all the tactics that we use or the names of staffers who are doing it, because we are in a constant sort of running battle with censors there. But suffice it to say that we change as the environment changes. The point that I hope that you can take away from just this segment of it, talking about China, is this. Social media is much bigger than just Twitter or Facebook. I know we love these platforms because we're on them all the time and we use them frequently. But there are entire networks that you've probably never heard of where VOA is building mass audiences and is having a real-world impact, and no one is better at that than VOA's Mandarin service. So shifting over for a moment to the Somali service, to VOA Somali, they're reaching more than half the population in Somalia every week. Their show, Kabanaha, is on Somali national television, it's on satellite, and it's online, where we're leveraging social media to better serve a community that is being hammered by jihadist recruiters. Reporter Haroon Marouf's 21,000 Twitter followers have helped him to generate hundreds of stories for his radio broadcasts and conversations with his audience. They tip him off regularly. They share information with him. But what's most impressive is how Haroon has leveraged this following into town halls and roundtables that put him in front of this community that is so seriously under threat. Now, second only to London, Minneapolis-St. Paul is the most successful city for jihadist recruiters. So this is a group of people who are just constantly under pressure from Islamic State and al-Shabaab. Come over and fight for us. They have this incredibly sophisticated propaganda mechanism. So these connections that we're trying to leverage are about connecting with audiences and humanizing the people who sit behind microphones and anchor desks at VOA. And it's no coincidence that some of our biggest names in broadcast are also, in many cases, our biggest names in social. Many of these guys have tens or even hundreds of thousands of followings on different platforms that they use to connect back to their broadcast, to their programming, and to talk directly to their audiences. And one of the people who really is incredibly successful at leveraging these platforms and reaching audiences is Central News correspondent in Bangkok, Steve Herman.
Since 2007, I think I've put out somewhere around 33,500 tweets and counting. I think what really makes the difference, you've got a tremendous interest in these breaking news stories. And there may be more than 1 million people tweeting about them, but there's a hunger, there's an insatiable appetite for quick and reliable information. And I think that's where we really have a niche, is we're on top of the stories. When I worked for the AP, we were proud to beat the competitors by a couple of minutes. Now on Twitter, I'm finding that we're actually able to beat the wires sometimes by hours on stories and crucial parts of the information for those stories. I tend, I think, to be a little bit more terse rather than humorous, but obviously if you're a good writer, a good headline on Twitter goes a long way. If you've got a story that's breaking, you've got to stick with it. If people are coming to depend on you for the information, you've got to be there and you've got to follow it up. The aftermath of Typhoon Haiyan, when we were able to land in some areas and be the first reporters to give the world an outside glimpse of what was happening with this tremendous devastation, obviously that has a big impact on social media. We have demands for radio and television and an extended web version, but we're making sure to get the most pertinent information out there as quickly as possible on Twitter.
Finally, let's talk just a little bit about the future and where this is probably heading. So, as everyone knows, there's a lot of talk about mobile first and how the future is all going to be on phones and tablets. The problem is that's become kind of a platitude with a lot of media companies. They take their existing content, they jam it into some apps, maybe they roll out responsive design, and they say, all right, we're done, we did mobile. Really, what we need to be thinking about is how you change an entire philosophy, including changing your content to meet people on those new platforms. So VOA's Houses service is now our most trafficked online operation. A year and a half ago, they were at the back of the pack online. They did great in radio, but now they are the number one service at VOA when it comes to online traffic, and that is almost entirely on the back of mobile. About 95% of their audience comes via mobile phones. So the service took a look at this and said, okay, well, if your audience is about 95% mobile and you're trying to build a new product, why even bother with a desktop site? But by the same token, they still love radio in Nigeria. The service gets over 10 million weekly listeners to their radio programs there. So the service really thought on this and said, how do we fuse this exploding mobile market with a group of people who still really love radio? And what they came back with was Dandelion VOA. In its first year, Dandelion has about 125,000 visits a month, about 50,000 likes on Facebook, off to a strong start for a young product, a new experiment coming out of the service. And what you'll see is VOA producing more of this kind of material over the next year or two. Not just shiny techie wrappers on old stuff, but actually coming up with new products that are meant to meet what a market is interested in, new editorial products. And all of this will be focused on helping our audiences understand America's role in an interconnected world. Some of our biggest web growth has come to the Ukrainian service following the Russian invasion of eastern provinces. Ukrainian service reporter Tatiana Voroshko is here to tell us what we're doing there.
Thank you, Matt. Hello. While increasing traffic to our website, we also doubled our TV audience. And we'll almost double the number of TV affiliates we cooperate in all forms, in different shapes, starting with live interactive, ad hoc, occasional, to the permanent placement. Also, in response to the crisis in Ukraine and response to the war, we reformatted all our shows by dramatically increasing the number of originally produced Ukraine-related packages. And clarifying our mission, we exactly know who we are, what we do, and what our audience wants. Central News has been placing a very high impetus on developments in Ukraine and in Russia by covering it from US or European international angle, but what's the most important, reporting from the front lines. And just like Daniel Sheriff in this package, what we're going to show you.
So we were just on the way to Debaltseve, and we were stopped on the road by the Ukrainian military. Although there was a ceasefire, temporary ceasefire over the weekend to get civilians out of the city, fighting does continue. It's still a very intense situation.
Студія Вашингтон. Унікальний погляд з Вашингтону. Studio Washington is one of our new shows, which I help anchor.
Здравствуйте, это программа
It runs on the popular national TV channels ICTV and Channel 24, covering nearly 90% of Ukrainian territory, with a clear focus on Washington's view of the conflict.
Ukraine should be an independent state.
Our concentrated approach cut through the information overload for people who used to watch Russian TV and now distrust some of the broadcasting from both Moscow and Kiev. A BBG Commission survey found that we are reaching nearly 20% of Ukrainian adults weekly, including 1 in 10 adults in the critical eastern regions.
Перший раунд національних дебатів між політичними партіями та блоками, які
VOA has played a leading role in this young democracy, with veteran reporter Miroslava Gongadze chosen to help moderate Ukrainian parliamentary election debates.
хочуть почути від вас, що ви конкретно будете робити для
Тільки
цього.
партія,
Дякую.
Миросю. Дякуємо.
Здравствуйте, в эфире «Настоящее время».
VOA's Russian service works with our colleagues at Radio Free Europe to co-produce «Настоящее время», or Current Time, which airs daily in Ukraine, Moldova, Lithuania, and Georgia. Russia itself is harder. Regular affiliates are out of the question. President Putin threw us off Russian TV and radio stations years ago, and Russia jams radio signals from outside the country. In Russia, we do two things: a focused internet strategy, including interactions on live streams with young Russians, and when we can, appearances on Russian cable TV stations. For example, almost every day our man, Misha Gudkin in New York, reports on the Russian business channel about the stock market and the falling value of a ruble, pocketbook issues for Russians at a time of Western sanctions over Ukraine. Thank you for watching. I want to share some of my observations from my recent trip to Ukraine. I was there in September. I could see how much the country has changed, and I saw that how much popular Voice of America has become. I still have to yet meet a person who doesn't know what Voice of America. And there are a few factors which are objective. First of all, there is a war. In the situation of the war, people seek out information. Every Ukrainian family has at least one political analyst, as I say. Also, our TV affiliates, which were focusing on the news rather than information, also has increased their popularity dramatically. So we kind of hitch our wagon to the right horse. But there is another factor. The role of the United States is playing in today's situation in Ukraine. It's incredibly important. I think it wouldn't be our statement to say that the future of Ukraine, Ukraine remaining sovereign country, independent, and lives of many people depends on what is decided right now, right here in Washington. And here's where we come into play. I just mentioned before that we clarified our mission. Our mission has become to tell Ukrainian audience what United States, or exactly the Washington, thinks, does, what are the debates, and what they're going to do, and in simple question, how regular Ukrainians ask us, are they going to help us? That's what we answer. And I could tell, and I could see by responses from our audience that people are very well versed in United States politics, and we are the major source of that. We were covering very closely debates and movement of the Ukraine Freedom Support Act. I don't think anybody else was covering this as detailed as we were. And Ukrainians know the politicians. And we're surprised to know who's Menendez, to know who's Korke, Marcy Kaptur. I think they were better versed in United States politics than the regular Ohioans. And I think if Samantha Power ran for the presidential position, she might have won. So that's our mission. That's our major focus. In terms of disinformation campaign, we have two sets of challenges. The first challenge is clear. This is Russian disinformation campaign, Russian propaganda. Here we present the reality as compared to alternative reality of what Russia presents, and occasionally we call on some falsehoods. But there is another challenge. People in Ukraine, maybe because of naivety, but I think more because of a desperation, kind of overstate, and they have high expectations. They misunderstand what the United States is doing. Some people in Ukraine believe that, or there was actually reported in the news that McCain is a new defense minister and he's about to send drones. So what our affiliates are asking us, they say, okay, we have news, and Ukrainian market is very, it's open market. We have news, but please explain it to us. So the latest interactives I have been doing, my colleagues were doing, were mostly about explaining, interpreting. We became not only a popular voice, we became an authoritative voice. We became experts on this particular topic. And the last observation I want to share with you is the thing which made the most impression on me in Ukraine is how strong Ukrainian civil society is. The volunteer movement. Millions of people volunteer, donate money. They're actually crowdsourcing the army. They help the refugees. They help families of the wounded warriors or people who died at war. And I think at a certain point, the Voice of America, not just for the last few years, but for the whole of its existence, has been playing, was one of the voices who helped to build this civil society. We were one of the voices, but we were a very consistent voice, telling them about non-governmental organizations, telling them to take charge of their lives, telling them to ask from their authorities, telling them to be responsible for their lives, for their actions, and for their society. So society in Ukraine become much less paternalistic. And I have to say that I'm very happy, I'm very concerned, but also happy that Ukrainian service, Voice of America in general, is taking part in what's happening right now in Ukraine on both professional and personal level. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tatiana. At VOA this year, we have added resources to our coverage of American foreign policy and worked on improving our collaboration with the United States State Department. It's a relationship that is good for both sides, and we were most gratified this year to have been granted 4 interviews with Secretary of State John Kerry. We had one Africa 54 host Vincent Makori on Sudan. There was another with State Department correspondent Scott Stearns about ISIS. A third with Afghan Service Chief Masoud Faravar on the change in government in Kabul. Finally, VOA Persian anchor Siamak Degunpour talked to Secretary.
So we are constantly hopeful that we can resolve the differences between Iran and the United States and the international community, particularly on the nuclear program, but on other issues too.
You know, as Ukraine can now be counted as a friendly media environment and one that we have a lot of access to, Iran's government is probably one of the most hostile on earth towards the United States. In recent years, our VOA Persian service has suffered jamming. There have been threats against family members of journalists and many other abuses. And yet, according to our most recent data, VOA may be the most important, the most popular international news broadcaster in Iran. So for more on what we're doing in Iran, what our efforts have been in the last year, I asked Setarai Derekshesh to talk to you a little bit as well. Setarai?
Good morning. I'd like to begin by asking ourselves a question. Why are we doing what we do? And I'd like to start with a story from Shiraz, a city in Iran with a population of 1.5 million, the size of Philadelphia. And I want to talk about 2 boys that you will see the pictures in a minute. We don't know these boys' names, but we know that this picture was taken at the end of January of this year in the city of Shiraz. This is a major public event where authorities in Iran confiscated more than 6,000 satellite dishes and destroyed them in the presence of their owners. All television broadcasts are strictly controlled by the state in Iran. A special entity, the IRIB, has total monopoly on all types of television production and distribution. But for up to 80% of Iranians, state-owned TV channels run by the IRIB are the main source of information about the outside world. By special decree, the parliament banned all satellites, and owning a satellite dish is a crime. As you see, there are banners that they say why and how foreign broadcasts are bad for lives in Iran. They destroy lives. They destroy family values. We are even compared as weapons aimed at destroying life inside Iran, and as seen by the clergy and the military and the Basij. These are the organizers of this type of public events. But an event like this in Iran is not happening only in Shiraz, but this is in Tehran. But it shows also, and it confirms, that our broadcasts matter and our broadcasts are popular and important. Iranian authorities admit that up to 50% of Iranians do watch foreign satellite programs, and all these measures that you see, the destruction of these dishes, have only temporary effect. Some time ago, the Iranians even had to use an army personnel carrier to destroy the dishes they confiscated to send a message. The slogan here that you see on the American flag says "Death to America," and these dishes for the organizers of this event are the essence of America. They are America itself. And I think this short story is just an illustration that in Iran, we are dealing a very hostile media environment. In spite of the strong headwind, we are expanding our reach. And according to a BBG and Gallup survey, on a weekly basis, we have expanded our reach to more than 3%. And we have an overall reach of 24% right now in Iran. Now, the video that you're about to see is an outline of what we do and what we offer to our viewers. News and current affairs remain two of our strongest broadcast products. Our audiences in Iran know they can rely on Voice of America Persian early news, NewsHour, and late news to deliver breaking news, live coverage, and in-depth analysis with a strong American and international perspective from some of the best in our profession who combine first-hand knowledge of Iran with in-depth understanding of current affairs. Voice of America Persian live special from Vienna in November on the crucial moment in the P5+1 nuclear deal talks with Iran was one of our most watched programs because we offered a unique perspective from various angles, including the views of the key U.S. allies, something that the state-owned Iranian channels never do.
Well, basically, we have increased dramatically the number of our live broadcasts, featuring a great number of special reports on U.S. foreign policy towards Iran, on human rights violations in Iran, on the international effort to fight ISIS, and practically all major stories in the Middle East.
We widened the geography of our reporting and sent our best reporters and stringers to cover key events on the East Coast from New York to Florida and on the West Coast to Los Angeles and San Francisco. We also reported live from Iraq and Jerusalem and all over Europe, from Geneva to Vienna to Paris.
Well, of course, we aim to be the leading Persian language broadcaster breaking major news stories on air. But we also pay great attention to storytelling. We believe that for our audience, storytelling, being in-depth and objective are of utmost importance, even if we are not the first network to put it on air.
Our work is also based on the audience research. We streamlined our program mix, solved personnel and organizational problems, enhanced our multimedia reporting, and followed a three-pronged strategy to work in a hostile media environment, using available openings in broadcast, web, and social media markets, where Iranian viewers and digital platform users are looking for balanced and unfiltered information about America and world events. Thanks to this approach, we were able to score with a number of very important stories, like international campaigns to free Amir Hekmati, a former U.S. Marine imprisoned in Iran on false charges, and to free Jason Rezaian, the Washington Post reporter also jailed in Iran. We were the first to report on TV on the effort by American religious leaders to initiate dialogue with Iran, while we also focused on innovations, medicine, and high-tech content that our Iranian viewers are increasingly asking us to see more on our programs. Staying ahead of the competition is a challenge that we gladly accept because it pushed us to innovate. Now, as part of our digital strategy, we have redesigned and rebalanced our website. Along with posting news, features, and commentaries, we are now focusing more on our own programs, our own hosts, and our anchors. Every program has now its own separate web section page that combines different forms of content. How do we score on the web in Iran? One indirect indicator is to compare ourselves with what our main competitor, the IRIB, is doing. As of mid-January of this year, our website is 1 million viewers ahead, visitors ahead of the competition that we've been keeping the lead throughout the year through. Cross-promotion of content between our platforms also allows us to have a steady growth in followers for our social media accounts. How do we score on Facebook? Well, since Facebook has been frequently banned in Iran, it is very difficult to find a solid comparison. But we decided to have a look as one of the most recognized Facebooks of President Rouhani. And guess what? As of today, on Facebook, we are more popular than the president, than the Iranian president. Now, if we look at our YouTube numbers, we see that we have almost 3 times the number of total views of our videos that our friendly competitor, the BBC, has. Is it too little or is it a lot? Just for the sake of comparison, we looked at the total number of views on YouTube account of Fox News, and they showed that we're not that very much behind. The synergy between what we do for broadcast, web, and social media is very important to us because we see this as our future when more and more of our viewers become digital users and looking for digital content. Those two boys that I started my presentation with, in the next 5 to 6 years, they will join the young generation, the 60% of the population of Iran, and they will be connected to everyone in Asia and in America. And we would like to be ready for that.
instagram.com/VOA فارسی همراه صدای آمریکا با اینستاگرام.
David? Thank you very much, Satari.
Hey, David, I know this is scripted and we're holding questions till the end, but can I ask a quick Iranian-specific question? Is that okay?
Please do.
It was interesting to me. You cited a lot. That was great presentations. Please sit. You cited a lot of Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. Is that restricted at all in Iran today, or is that freely open like it is in the United States? For the purposes of the mic, she said everything we have banned. So how do we, how are those accurate measures when most Iranians can't access them? Or
that's one of the reasons I brought this up. We do have very good, the Gallup survey has done also digital media and social media, but this is something that we need to do more. We don't have enough research.
Sorry, yeah.
Very good point that I also brought up with Andy Lack when we had the discussion. The survey that we have is great with Gallup, but it is not enough. We need to have more surveys. We need to be closer to Iran. We are using other sources also from our own. For instance, we're checking the Annenberg School of Communication. They have a social media and digital media department in Pennsylvania, and we're going through that. It is not enough, and we have to take this with a big grain of salt.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to interrupt, David. It was just interesting to me. That was a great presentation. Thanks. And let me acknowledge, since you referred to him, Andy Lack is here. Welcome, Andy. Came a while ago, but we have Andy sitting at the table now, particularly for Ryan, who can't see him. Keep going, David.
All right. Well, our mission in denied areas like Iran, Russia, China, pretty clear and obviously essential. But we at VOA also have a mission to be part of the global conversation about our own country and our own values. Worldwide, VOA is reaching wider audiences in targeted areas in the last year, 15 months, without substantially increasing costs by adding television and radio affiliates to our many partnerships around the world. We now reach a majority of our audiences through affiliates, and the model shows great promise for the future. In my time as VOA director, we've gone from having an audience, a Spanish language audience of roughly 4 million, up to pretty close now to 30 million. We've done that by adding new affiliates across Latin America. We offer them something they can't get elsewhere. We call it the U.S. Bureau model or the Washington Bureau model. And even on a controversial story, like Ferguson, Missouri, for example, this past year, there's an important underlying positive message that comes across in VOA reporting, that in this democracy, we report honestly about our shortcomings, and we publicly debate how to correct them. Alberto Pimenta was sent to Ferguson this year by Voice of America, and Alberto, I want you to come up now, please, and start by telling the governors about that reporting trip.
Good morning, how are you? When I went to Ferguson, Missouri, I did not expect being pepper sprayed to be part of my experience. We were caught in between the protesters and the police. I think the police didn't realize that I was part of the press. I was carrying a small camera. I didn't have the press gear that the person in the Ukraine had, so they probably thought I was a protester, and I was pepper sprayed. I was blind for about 30 minutes. But what I did know was the affiliates' appetite in Latin America to know more about this story and to understand better race relations in this country. As soon as I got to the St. Louis airport, I started receiving nonstop calls, and this allowed us to inform audiences in Central America, in South America, and in the Caribbean about this really controversial story, and a story that also illustrates part of American society. And that's something that VOA really takes pride in, and it's one of the reasons why we're here today. Also, by airing these protests and these grievances, and this was something that I heard from the affiliates, we were spreading a message of freedom and democracy to countries like Ecuador and Venezuela, where challenging authorities, it's something that is just not possible, it's not feasible. And through this, we helped in some way, shape, or form to maybe better the situation of freedom of expression in those countries that had been recently hit in recent years. But bringing on new affiliates is not a one-size-fits-all kind of operation. What works in Africa might not work in Latin America. What works in Ukraine might not work in Indonesia, where we have some of our biggest affiliate audiences.
Berarti beritanya lagi heboh nih, katanya.
We are on 8 of Indonesia's 11 national television networks, more than 20 regional channels, and hundreds of local radio stations with coverage of U.S. policies, world news, and Indonesian developments that reach nearly 20% of the adult population. Broadcasting to more than 33 million Indonesians a week, the world's largest Muslim country is VOA's biggest single audience.
VOA.
Student-led anti-government demonstrations are heading...
When violence between Venezuelan protesters and security forces killed more than 40 people last year, President Nicolás Maduro blamed the United States for plotting a fascist coup.
Sectores del poder estadounidense.
Elements of America's power structure and their internal subordinates
buscan
seek to demoralize, to blemish the armed forces.
Our audiences there heard balanced reporting from Washington and diaspora communities, as well as from Caracas. We're on leading networks in Colombia and Nicaragua, Argentina, Ecuador, and Peru, all of which are seen inside Venezuela.
After rain like this, your body's not the same one that you started 10, 15, 20 miles ago.
Okay, 10-4. We'll watch for you to come up and take the lead then.
Latin American affiliates come to us because we help them cover the United States in ways they cannot do themselves on issues such as immigration that are central to U.S. foreign policy.
Poniendo su vida en riesgo en el Río Grande. El manejo de la información que nos ofrecen desde La Voz de América es muy bien balanceado y eso le permite a nuestra estación ofrecer detalles de lo que está pasando en la frontera.
Disminuyen las detenciones de menores en la frontera sur de Estados Unidos.
Busca un plan más agresivo de Estados Unidos en sus países.
Es de responsabilidad compartida.
Continúa el impasse político entre republicanos y demócratas aquí en el Congreso estadounidense sobre la crisis de niños inmigrantes.
VOA tells America's story in ways no other broadcaster can. When Chechen brothers allegedly bombed the Boston Marathon, the city's Chechen community was flooded with media. We sent Russian service reporter Fatima Tlisova.
So I knew few Chechens who lived in Boston. I was familiar with the whole community, and they knew me from my previous reporting when I was still in the North Caucasus, and there was some level of trust established in my reporting. People in Russia mostly believe about the Boston tragedy is very similar to what we've heard from the mother of the Tsarnaev brothers, which is that the whole marathon bombing was prepared by the American CIA and the Russian FSB, a joint special operation to frame the Chechen brothers. In my experience, telling the truth and paying attention to the details, no matter how ridiculous sometimes they might seem to us or how small they might seem to us, is very important, because that is the only let's say, ultimate weapon to contradict the Kremlin's propaganda.
美国高中的各种校内活动中，除了各类球类比赛以外
We also tell lighter American stories in Mandarin on Walking to America, and in a mix of Urdu and English on Aisha Gilani's Kahani Pakistani.
I'm really excited because हम अभी मौजूद हैं at Keene, DC.
This is really exciting. One of our biggest new affiliates is in Nigeria, where you have already seen the growth of our mobile platform audiences in the north. On television, we are in partnership with the Channels TV network, led by our flagship daily news show, Africa 54, and its host, Vince McQuarrie.
Well, thank you very much, Alberto. And one of the most significant partnerships that actually we entered last year was with Channels Television of Nigeria. You know, as everybody knows, Nigeria is one of the most populous countries in Africa, with over 170, perhaps a million people. So for us, getting into this partnership, especially at a time when that country is grappling with the ever-increasing threat of the terrorist group Boko Haram, in a year that that country is preparing a presidential election, was very significant. It did indeed help us enhance the coverage of those stories. We have had the benefit of using some of their resources, fabulous reporters in different parts of that country, in places that we possibly could not get to. And that has helped us also have access to some really good experts and analysts who can talk to us because they know that they have an audience in Nigeria, in the millions of people who are watching Channels Television that is carrying our programs. But also on our side, they have benefited by having inputs from our reporters from different parts of the United States, but also even in other areas of Africa because they're able to interact with them on so many of their programs. Let's share with you just a snapshot of what else we are doing. With Nigeria's presidential election postponed over security concerns, reporter Chris Stein took his camera to areas under attack by Boko Haram and visited with civilians displaced by the violence. But no one has done more to cover northern Nigeria for us than Hausa Service reporter Ibrahim Ahmed, who spoke with on-assignment host Alex Villarreal.
I spoke with a refugee in Adamawa State who was shot twice in the head by Boko Haram militants. You know, miraculously he survived. You know, I spoke with a woman who was in her home one day. You know, they came knocking on the door. They took her husband. They killed him right in front of her. I didn't know it was really bad, very dangerous until this assignment, because people are living in fear. The whole parts of northeastern Nigeria, the whole of Borno State, you know, some areas of Adamawa State, they are under siege.
People on the front lines in the fight against Ebola.
In West Africa, we helped fight the spread of Ebola with town hall meetings on TV and radio, public service announcements, and sharing material with the BBC, including our eyewitness reporting from the center of the epidemic.
After disinfecting the body, the undertakers are preparing themselves to put the body into the body bag. The husband can only watch how the undertakers are carrying his dead wife away.
Hundreds of new arrivals land in the tiny village of Minkamen on the banks of the White Nile River.
In South Sudan, Nairobi correspondent Gab Josselin followed the fighting and the civilians it pushed farther from home.
These boats have just arrived from Jonglei State around the area of Bor. People spent 8 hours traveling in the dead of night just to escape the fighting in the area. And now they're coming here with almost everything they own, including cattle in some cases. If they have the money, they might move on to transition to other places, or they'll stay here until it's safe enough to go home.
In the Sahel, VOA is reprogramming radio streams to better focus programming in local languages in parts of Mali and Niger that are under threat from Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb.
Bonjour, ici Mariama Diallo.
And we are developing a weekly news magazine in French to draw even more television affiliates across Francophone Africa. Well, here in Washington, VOA provided, that was last year, extensive coverage of President Obama's Young African Leaders Initiative and his Africa Leaders Summit on Trade, Investment, and Security and Democracy. And just on that particular story, I have had this wonderful opportunity to talk to young people from across the continent, because this is what I'm able to do with Africa 54, being able to broadcast to so many African, English-speaking, and even some French-speaking countries which have a huge populations of young people speaking English, because they have this interest in coming to the United States to learn about business, entrepreneurship, innovations, and they, because of our programming and working with affiliate stations across the continent, were able to show what they came and did here in Washington, D.C. Now we have so many young people inquiring on how they can do that, how they can get here. And so we believe that with that kind of reporting, with the kind of partnerships we're enjoying on the ground in Africa, we have that kind of influence among the youth who are the leaders of tomorrow, which has been recognized by the U.S. administration itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Vincent. So using just 27% of the BBG's overall budget, VOA programming accounts for nearly 80% of the BBG's audience worldwide. Though in fairness, we could not do it without our colleagues at the IBB, and their budget represents another 25% or so. So I want, fairness and truth in advertising. We depend very heavily on the IBB. And going forward, I'd like to just take a moment, actually, to thank our IBB colleagues for all that they do to make VOA successful and have done over the last 15 months. From research to program placement, from computer services to congressional liaison and communications, we count on the IBB, we count on them for human resource work, contracts, legal advice, and security. The list is long. Going forward, thanks to our strong partnership with Andre Mendez and his team, we expect to convert all of VOA television over the next couple of years to high-definition television, the standard that the market now expects from us. We must do it or we will start losing affiliates. We must also replace our entire radio master control. Frankly, the equipment is so antiquated we can no longer buy replacement parts, and we're really quite worried about it. So money has been set aside. We're working with Andre on that as well. It's an incredibly important project. And VOA is moving towards a digital-first central newsroom with rapid reaction and rewrite desks feeding coverage more quickly and directly to the English language website. A newly empowered managing editor will oversee story teams to produce more, better, and faster television and radio. And in addition to U.S. foreign policy that I mentioned earlier, we're also improving our coverage of issues such as internet freedom, corruption, education and health, and New York business news. I can't tell you how pleased I am to be serving now under the leadership of Mr. Andrew Lack, who came in during the presentation. I want to say thanks especially to you, Chairman Schell, and to Undersecretary Stengel for bringing him here. And at VOA, we look forward to upping our game in the next year in coverage of American innovation and technology, which I know, Andy, is a priority for you. You've heard a lot from us today about the importance of VOA's mission. I don't want to close without asking you to not just take our word for it.
Many of the reports we've seen out of propaganda TV out of Russia is completely ludicrous. It is important for us to ensure that Voice of America is out there, strong, robust, and sending the truth to the people. Even if it doesn't necessarily make the United States look good or the West look good, it's the truth. And when people see the truth, they understand that the West is the way to be. They understand that gravitating towards freedom is the way to go.
When I've traveled and asked questions, the Voice of America is always high on the list for people that are seeking peace and want to know what's going on in the rest of the world. Because as you know, communications sometimes are very guarded in some of the places. And with that open voice and just given the encouragement that something else is possible, that it can be different than what they're experiencing is very helpful to many of the people.
I'm an enthusiastic supporter because this is one way that the people in the various countries around the world hear us speak directly to them. They're not getting it through a filtered news organization, or even worse, filtered by their own government. They hear it from us directly about how we feel regarding situations.
So let me end our presentation now with 3 quick examples of impact and 1 more news development. First, in Myanmar, we posted our first full-time Burmese correspondent in Yangon this year, and we expanded our 30-minute television broadcast to 7 days a week on Skynet channel there in Burma. And in November, Service Chief Than Luin Tun had an unprecedented round of interviews with the Speaker of the Parliament, the Army Chief, who had not given interviews before, Opposition Leader Aung San Suu Kyi, and President Thein Sein. The series was so extraordinary and influential that a Burmese publisher printed it as a book. Here it is. One of the issues that Luin raised with the president in his interview was the need for better media access. And 3 weeks later, the presidential palace announced the start of weekly press briefings. My second impact example comes from Afghanistan. Call-in shows there, even about women's issues, are generally dominated by men. So the female co-hosts of our new radio show, Najiba Noshaba, decided they would not take calls from men. For the first few weeks, not a single woman called. But then they had the idea to ask the men who called to please pass the phone to their wives. And it worked. And now, the shows on literacy, economic opportunity, prenatal care, and other issues are drawing floods of calls from women in the once improbable places in the Taliban's southern heartland. My third example has to do with Malala Yousafzai of Pakistan, as everyone knows, winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, a young woman who survived a 2012 Taliban assassination attempt. Malala requested a particular song to be sung at the ceremony in Oslo by the man who wrote it and recorded it. The band is poet Sardar Ali. He is a member of the VOA Diwa service. The song is Bibi Shirina, which means adorable lady. The song salutes the importance of women and the importance, most of all, of women's education. And now that message and that song has been heard throughout the world. So those are my 3 impact examples. Now, one little piece of news to close with. I want to report to the board on an arrest. Police in northwestern Pakistan said they have detained a Taliban commander wanted for the killing of our reporter, Mukarram Khan Atif, who was gunned down in 2012 while praying in his local mosque. With Atif on that tragic night 3 years ago was his nephew, Arshad Muhammad. Arshad now carries on his uncle's work as a stringer for the Voice of America. So if you ask, what is the Voice of America? It is Arshad Muhammad. And hundreds more like him around the world and here in this building who are helping America to tell the truth to the world. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much, David, and also to the VOA team, both the members here who gave a great presentation and also the hundreds of VOA members around the world who are doing great and difficult work. So I have about 1 million questions, but I'm not going to dominate the question and answer thing. I'm going to start with one broad one and then open it up to my colleagues, and if there's dead air, I can fill it. I got lots of questions. I guess just a broad question. It's been 15 months or 14 months since your last presentation, and you gave a lot of updates. I'm curious as to what's not working. You know, if you sit here and say, okay, for the last 15 months, we made a lot of progress, what do you think, you know, kind of running down the list are the things that are the biggest challenges at VOA, and what's not working that, you know, a year from now you'd like to come back and tell this board that you made progress fixing?
Mr. Chairman, I'm concerned about having enough resources to tackle the challenges of ISIS and of Vladimir Putin. We've done some very imaginative and creative things with some more resources than we had before. But these are really serious communications challenges for our country. I mean, there are challenges on many fronts, but our area here is communications. And I really hope that we can find ways to put more resources to these issues. It's not easy. We talked in the presentation about Russia, and of course we're blocked from stations there. But there are ways to work it. Our internet effort in Russian is really quite effective and reaches large numbers of young people in Russia. And we're on Russian Business Channel. For whatever reason, they're allowing us on there almost daily, and we're in negotiations with them about additional programming that we might do for them. But I'm not sure where I'm going to get the money to do it. Resource question primarily. A lot of creative people in this building and around the world working for VOA. And I'm not saying, but it's given the kinds of challenges we've had in the last year, I am concerned about that.
Thank you, David. Let me open it up to the rest of the board if you guys have questions. Okay, Michael.
David, thank you. That was a great presentation, and for a newer board member, incredibly important and educational. So you and your team, thank you very much. I want to talk about measurement for a minute, because it seems like, when we hear about the outcomes, the measurement is quite specific. When we heard about impacts, it's wonderful but anecdotal. So how do we get from measuring just outcomes to the actual impact, what we're doing, in a more scientific, measurable, and specific way?
There's a lot of work being done in the Office of Strategic Development. And Rob's people, who are sitting right next to you, he could probably talk in greater detail than I can about how the efforts are being developed to try to quantify, if you will, impact. It's difficult. One man's impact is another man's anecdote that may not mean much. So it's very, very challenging. But clearly, we need to try to do it. We need to try to figure out what kind of impact we want to make, and we need to try to measure whether or not we're succeeding. You can't have impact without audience. So we must do good measurements of how many people we reach. And then we have to figure out, are we reaching with the right sorts of things? Are we having an impact? Are we giving them news that is useful to them and information that makes a difference for our country's priorities? It's not easy, and it's a big topic, and I actually think, Governor, as you get into it, you're going to want to talk to Rob Bohl extensively, Bruce Sherman from his team. There are a lot of people in the building thinking about it and working on it on VOA's behalf. So, I mean, you put your finger on a very important topic, but a challenging one, frankly.
Thanks. Next, Leon.
Thanks very much, David. I take it that Tatiana Varoshko's presentation sort of covered both Ukraine and Russia.
That was the goal, yes.
That was the goal. And for obvious reasons, I also would like to compliment you on the title of the show, Настоящее время, because not only it's current time, but of course it's also play on Russian grammatic term, which means present time. And you are present. I think this is a very fortuitous and lucky title. Now, you already started answering my question. The challenges in Russia. I'm happy that RBK is carrying you, the business channel, but 80% of Russians hold dollars. They are very interested. I understand, but beyond that, you face unique challenges in Russia now. You started talking about this. Could you expand a little bit on this and tell us what it is that you would like the board to do? I mean, I know you want more funding, but is there anything else that you would like us to do?
Well, Nastasia Vremya is a program that is not shown on television in the Russian Federation, as you know. It's a show that's aimed at the periphery. And I think we and our colleagues at Radio Free Europe are having some real impact there. These are early days yet. The show's still kind of in its infancy. but already it's on the air in a number of key broadcasters around the periphery. And the thing that happens with a show like that is every once in a while you'll get something on there, a piece of video, a piece of information, a commentary or something that we'll put up on YouTube, and it'll go viral right into the Federation and all over the place, in the whole Russian-speaking space. So I think putting a good show on the air that has some interesting news and commentary that they're not seeing on Kremlin TV, even if it isn't seen in the Federation, it still gets into the Federation via the internet and becomes part of the conversation in the Russian-speaking world. So that's worthwhile, and I'd love to see us put more resources into that effort. I think if we work with broadcasters around the region, there are more places we can get that show on the air. And Radio Free Europe is working very hard on that piece of it. So even though it's not on the Federation, it's worth doing, and we should put more resources into up our game in it. I know we're both working towards having going up to 7 days a week. We're both going to do a weekend show, and I think that'll be helpful as well. But resources. The internet effort is probably the biggest play in terms of reaching sizable numbers of smart young Russians. And RFE is the main news, perhaps, if you will, site, and should be in Russian, but ours is not to be sniffed at. It has a very sizable audience, and of course our effort is to really lay out for people what American foreign policy is, what the comments of American officials are about what's happening in Ukraine. And again, resources would be helpful in that area. There are a lot of other things we can try. As I said, I think that if we had enough resources to make multiple attempts to get on to different stations in the Russian Federation, we might have other successes besides the Russian Business Channel. And we're talking with them now about putting another show on the air. We did have one show on the air for about 3 weeks with them, and then they killed it, I think, frankly, because our commentators on the third show were rather good. There you go. We've got to mix it up. We've got to be ready to play in the game. And it's going to be a long haul. It's going to be difficult. But it's very, very important, as I know you believe.
Great. Thanks, David. Next, Matt.
Thanks for the presentation, and I want to thank everybody that presented, as well as all of the VOA folks that weren't able to present, because there's a lot of tremendously good work that's going on. So support it and all that. So, David, time has passed since the last presentation. Could you give us a rundown of the bureaus in the U.S. and how you're utilizing them?
The biggest two bureaus are in New York and Los Angeles, and in the last period we have put some additional investment into New York, which we think has legs, if you will, that there's much more we can be doing there. A number of the language services are practically making daily, certainly several times a week, use of that bureau, which has a nice vista of Manhattan with the Empire State Building in the distance on the main set. We're in conversations about some ideas for possibly doing a show out of New York, and we have the capabilities to do that. I'm hoping to talk to Andy further about what might be possible there. And our next focus needs to be Los Angeles, to up the quality of the equipment there a little bit and try to get some more broadcasting out of California. Other than those, we have small presences. We have one in Houston. We have one or two other reporters around the country who work from their homes, who don't have bureaus that they drive into, but do very good work.
Great, thanks, David. So let me jump in with an additional question before we keep going around the table and on the phone. So you alluded a number of times in your presentation to the affiliate strategy, right? And there's no question that the affiliate strategy that we pursued at VOA has resulted in an incredibly increased reach for our programming around the world. I guess I have two concerns about that I'd love if you would address and we could discuss a little bit. The first concern is that it is a shift from being a broadcaster to a program producer, essentially, because what you're doing is you're putting your distribution in the hands of others, which gives you reach. But the flip side is if they decide, one morning not to carry your program, suddenly we're without distribution, as opposed to being up on a satellite feed or somewhere else. And so that concerns me that we're giving up our distribution. And then the second piece of it, which is not necessarily a concern, but I think is a strategic shift that we ought to be conscious of, is that it's shifting us from being a broadcaster who programs and curates to a content producer who actually goes out and tells stories, and some of the stories are impressive and great. So I'm not saying that's wrong. It's just, as I kind of listen to this, that we are pursuing a path at VOA very clearly, and wondered if you could talk a little bit about that affiliate strategy and the risks in that strategy.
Certainly, sir. I mean, first of all, when it comes to areas that are, countries that are a priority for U.S. national security and that are the term I use, denied areas, the affiliate approach doesn't apply. We need to be on a satellite to Iran, and even though they're smashing up the dishes, there are plenty more being made all the time. We need to be in their faces, if you will. We need to have a satellite up there with a broadcast that 24% of the country watches, even though the government doesn't want them to. So it's not as if an affiliate strategy will work everywhere. But if you take a place like Latin America, where when I arrived, we were reaching only 4 million people, and with no additional funds, but a new strategy, we're now reaching close to 30 million. I think it's worth doing. On Azteca television in Mexico, there's 6 million people a night watching the show. We're only on for 3 or 4 minutes a night. But we get a chance to describe a story that they've asked for, maybe it's the immigration, and present the American side of that story, present it from an American journalist's point of view. And it's just worth doing. It's not very expensive, and it does have an impact on a country just to our south, where their opinions matter to us. So I'm not saying it's no replacement for the radio and television broadcasts that we persistently and forcefully will keep in the place towards denied areas, towards challenging areas, towards deeply poor areas. But it's an addition which I think gives our country soft power that is in our interests and that makes sense for us going forward. You're right that we don't have as much control over every single word of what's presented anymore. But we also have some advantages that come with the affiliate model that are kind of inherent to it. Our journalists from LATAM are on the phone calls in the morning with the journalists of the various stations that they're going to be on that day. They're part of the conversation. They're in the bloodstream, if you will, of the top journalistic organizations around Latin America. And that has an impact that you don't always see on the air, but sometimes it affects what they don't report. We help them correct a story. Oh, the Cubans are saying this. Yeah, they said that last week. It wasn't true then either. You know, you can sometimes make a point in an editorial discussion and help journalists do their jobs very professionally. The other thing is that by appearing on important stations that have big audiences, there's an inherent statement there that these stations believe that Voice of America has credibility, that they're presenting a VOA product as something they're proud of and proud to be associated with. That has a positive power message for our country.
Great, thanks. Ken, do you have any questions? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Karen, you want to go first? Go ahead, Karen.
Hi, thank you very much for that terrific presentation. And again, as a new board member, it's extremely helpful. I just wanted to probe a little bit more on the curation thread. How do you think about that? I'm sure this is something you confront all the time. How do you think about covering U.S. foreign policy in original programming versus all the other programming that's being produced by non-government sources about U.S. foreign policy, and whether or not you want to curate some of that versus producing original programming?
Assignments for Voice of America. First assignment to present our own country, its values, and its dramas, its story in a compelling way. And the third assignment is to present American foreign policy and responsible views thereon. Frankly, I would like to be doing more than we are in that last area. I think there are some opportunities, and I look forward to working under Andy's leadership to figure out some of the things that I think we could do beyond what we're doing now to do that better. But we do a pretty good job, and it's, as you noted, there have been a number of interviews with the Secretary of State. There have been dozens of interviews with assistant secretaries and other senior officials in the American foreign policy apparatus, with senior senators who have particular expertise in different parts of the world. So we take our mission of letting foreigners know what Washington is saying about them and thinking about them very seriously. It's one of our main efforts. We've added resources, put a second reporter at the State Department, and added other resources to try to up our game in this area. But I do think there's more that we need to be doing in the coming year.
Yeah, David, thank you. It was a terrific presentation. Also, it is, as the other governors who will eventually go out into the field will see, it is incredibly inspiring to be meeting with reporters who are making a difference in different places around the world and putting their lives at risk to get our stories out. Let me ask you a question, one which we all know they say that the Voice of America is occasionally criticized for not being the first to put breaking news up on the website. And this is a criticism that's been made in the past, and whether one agrees or disagrees with the criticism. I know you've made some efforts to change that over the past year, and I was wondering, you didn't go into that in the presentation to talk about the direction you're taking the newsroom.
Well, thank you for the question, because it gives me an opportunity to say a couple of things. I mean, look, we are a news organization, and we do like to be first with the news, and we do like to have it on early if we can. But I think our highest priority is getting the news right. I'd rather be right and be second, third, or fourth than be first. That's for sure. The other thing is, again, resources. The English language website, which is what Americans, people in this country, tend to go to first to see what VOA may be reporting, is only one of 50 or 60 websites at Voice of America. We do 1,600 hours a week of radio and television. So we're reporting a lot of things, a lot of stories that you will not see on the English language website, because the editors of that website make their own decisions about what that particular audience might be the most interested in, or might most likely want to read. So I think sometimes there's a tendency to think that whatever's on the English language website that's it, that's what VOA reported. It's so not true. We are in, 46, 47 languages. So there's a tremendous amount of journalism coming out of here in multiple different languages, serving multiple different markets, and each one has to be considered separately. So I think that's part of the answer to your question. Did I lose the thread of part of it as well? Okay. Well, we've added some people. We've added what for us is a lot, 6 new slots to the English language website. And as I mentioned in the presentation, we're in the process of a reform of the newsroom to a more digital-first kind of workflow. Working with Andy, I hope to be shortly selecting the new managing editor of the newsroom. And we're excited about some of the things over the last year that we've done as well in terms of getting more unique content out of the language services, stories out of the Tibetan service, or out of the Hausa service that nobody else has, that we have because we're particularly strong on the ground in certain places. Getting those stories into English and onto all of the different platforms that we have. That's one of the efforts we've made a lot of progress on in the last year, but there's much more to do. This news organization has all kinds of capabilities to do unique content that can't be done elsewhere. How many other news organizations have 19 stringers who speak Hausa and are in northern Nigeria right now, right amongst the Boko Haram people? Nobody. Nobody has that except us. So we know more about what's going on in that particular part of the world than anyone else. We also have the strength brought to the table by our partners at Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia, Middle East Broadcasting. We work closely with them, and sometimes content from them can be very valuable to our audiences as well.
Hey, Ryan, I know it's hard to follow on the phone, but do you have any questions for David or his team?
Thank you, and thank you, David. You mentioned the coverage you're doing, for example, on Ukraine and the confrontation with ISIS in northern Iraq. very, very hot and critical issues, certainly. To what extent do you consult with, coordinate with other BBG entities such as MBN or RFE-RL, to ensure that our broad efforts are complementary and not duplicative?
Ambassador, we're often the fortunate recipients of videotape from MBN. We get some very good material, particularly in that form, from MBN, which obviously is much thicker on the ground throughout the Middle East than we are. And I know that there's one particular person who calls them several times a week, if not more, to make sure that they're getting what they want from us and we're getting what we want from them. I think there are things we can do to make that work even better, but frankly, it is working quite well. We work obviously very closely with Radio Free Europe since we're partners on some shows, and since the Ukraine and Russia story is such a huge one and so difficult to cover well. So I know that RFE is doing more and more shooting of video. We've been able to use some of their material, and I believe and hope that they're using some of ours. It's certainly available. The DELET system is there, and there's BBG Direct, which is a platform on which we offer our journalism mostly to our affiliates, but also to our partners within the BBG. So there's more that can be done, but I think there's been some real progress in terms of better collaboration over the last year, and I look forward to doing more under Andy's leadership on that subject in the coming year.
Okay, we've gone around the table. Any other board members have different questions that they want to ask? We have a little bit of time left. Let me throw one more out. We talked a lot about resources here, and it's something I think about all the time at BBG. So it's a multi-dimensional. There's so many different dimensions to the resource question. We have radio versus television versus new media. We have different entities that require different missions and different funding. One of the ones that I've heard talked a lot about in the last kind of 6 months to a year is the different languages that we support. Right? There's definitely a movement among some portions of the government to scale back the amount of languages that we as BBG broadcast in, put more resources towards English and a couple, as they call it, strategic languages, and not support the 50 so odd languages that we support. How do you think about, I mean, you could argue both sides of that. How do you, David, think about that in terms of kind of resource allocation?
Well, let's talk about Africa for a second. In Africa, we have big broadcasts, important broadcasting done in English by people like Vincent, in French. So we're in the big multinational languages, what you might call colonial languages also of Africa. But we're also in 15, I think something like that, 12 to 15 other languages in Africa. It's always difficult to figure out where to get the balance, how to get the balance right. But for example, when we went into Bambara in Mali, after the Islamists started burning and pillaging throughout the north, we instantaneously increased our audience several times over. And another thing that I think is important to remember is that not that many people in African countries speak English or French. And most of them are men. If you want to reach women and young people, you want to be in the local vernacular languages. So there's a power to the fact that VOA is broadcasting in Bambara that is not to be denied. And by the way, we went into Bambara, and now Radio France Internationale has been forced to follow us. Only about 15% of the country speaks French. And yes, it's the elite, and it is an important audience, but if we want to really have impact and really have influence in that country, it's worthwhile for us to be in Bambara as well as French. And, there are different trade-offs in different parts of the world, and it's not always the same answer. Different markets, different I would maybe say something different. But using Mali as an example, I think we're right to be both in the major vernacular language and in French.
Great, thank you. Matt?
Thanks. So, David, my question has to do with the changes brought about because of the Smith Modernization Act and the ability for folks who intend to broadcast VOA product to American audiences. So there is a challenge that you go through, that the legal office goes through to check, right? So what's uncovered here is that there is a fair amount of copyright content, licensed content, that is in the VOA product. And so I've got two questions for you. One, is there an over-reliance on copyright content, whether it's AP, Reuters, whatever it is, and whether it's textual or video or graphical? And two, because of that copyright content, and we're unable to allow more people to have access to this because our systems, as I understand it, are unable to appropriately tag product that has copyright content. So we're unable to create a stream that permits non-copyright content to go to the audience, and so or go to the rebroadcaster. So we have to tell the broadcaster, go get your own license. Usually they'll say no. So then it's off limits to the rebroadcaster. So one is, are you using too much copyright content? Two, do you have a plan in place to deal with this inability to filter or tag content so that you can filter it out for distribution?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm very excited about the Smith-Mont Amendment, and I think it opens up some really interesting opportunities for VOA. Increasingly, I think of language services, each of them, as a global phenomenon. I mean, Farsi, there's 800,000 Farsi speakers in the state of California alone. So to think of a Farsi service as being just for Iran, it's just not the way the world works anymore. So I was delighted when the Smith-Mont Act was amended, and I'm interested in looking for ways to reach diasporas with VOA programming. As you mentioned, Governor, we can't give out, we don't own the U.S. rights to third-party material. I don't think it would be legal, in fact, for us to spend a single dollar on getting the U.S. rights to anything, since it's not part of our mission to broadcast to the United States specifically. So we do have to go station by station when someone asks us for a show and say, do you have a deal with AP? Do you have a deal with Reuters? Make sure they do before they can broadcast what would be third-party material. One thing to correct in your question, we do have a system for tagging all the material that comes into the house that comes from third parties. And in fact, there's a little bug, not very visible, but it's there, and we inside the house know, and our stations know as well, that we put up on the video, if it's video we're talking about, and most of the money is about video. So third-party material is marked, and we internally know when we're putting it up, and so do our affiliates. So we have a system. We're kind of in a transition period now where we're trying to get to a stage where we have, frankly, more stations in the United States that use our material. As it is now, I'm aware that there's about a dozen stations in Florida that use our Creole broadcasts. I know of several stations up in the Midwest using our Somali broadcasts. And here and there's a little bit of Spanish and a little bit of English being run in this or that place. There's even a station, an AM station here in town that runs some of our programming in English. So I'm hoping that over time, more stations will ask us for our material. And very frankly, I believe that this will help build understanding among the American people of the value of the Voice of America. It is going to be, among others, diaspora communities, because they have roots in their old countries, who are going to be able to understand better than most other taxpayers and voters why what we do here is so important, why it matters for our country.
Great. Let's take one more question if there is one. Any other governors have a question? Okay. David, once again, thank you very much for you and your team. A great presentation today. So the next BBG board meeting is going to be here at the Cohen Building on April 29th. And as I mentioned, I think we have a pretty exciting panel. In addition, we're going to be doing a deep dive. Brian, you're up at the next board meeting. It's the Middle Eastern Broadcasting. Oh no, I'm sorry. It's OCB. Carlos, you're up. Sorry. Brian looked at me in absolute horror just now. Carlos, you're up. It'll be OCB, which I think will be particularly exciting given all the changes in Cuba in the last several months, to hear how the Martis are handling. I will note, when I talked about this with Carlos yesterday, he said the first dam is broken, but there's 3 or 4 dams left, and we have relations with a lot of bad countries around the world, and just because we open relations doesn't mean it's free and open. So I think it's going to be an exciting time to kind of delve into how the Martis and how OCB is approaching the situation in Cuba. I'm also really pleased that this will be our last board meeting of the year that'll be in the Cohen building. We have 3 more board meetings. Not that I don't love the Cohen building. But we have 3 more board meetings in the rest of the year. As I mentioned, we have one in Prague. We have one down in Springfield. That's when you're up, Brian. Sorry to scare you. And then we're doing one at Radio Free Asia later in the year, which will be great down the street here. So for the meeting coming up on the 29th, if any governors have anything that they'd like to add to the agenda, please, as usual, get it to Susie Carroll, who's here, and we'll assemble all of them in the coming weeks and get it out to governors with plenty of time to read before the next meeting. At the next meeting, as I mentioned, Andy, before you got here, we'll do a more formal, I'll talk less and hand it over to you more, hopefully. You want to say anything to the assembled masses here? Or just hello?
We were doing so well there for the handoff. I have to say I'm happy, really happy to be here. And the reason is pretty obvious from today's presentation, the work that's being done here by our colleagues at VOA and all the presentations that I've been sitting in on and that many of the governors here have seen and participated in. It's just really strong work. There's just tremendous work going on across the board in all of the assets of U.S. international broadcasting. So I'm a lucky guy walking in the door here, the beneficiary of all that. I'd make a few quick, if I may, follow-up comments to the governor's excellent questions and shed a little bit more light on some of what David touched on so thoughtfully. Starting with Ryan's question, which your fellow governor, Ken Weinstein, and I observed firsthand, the collaboration between RFE and RFERL, and I'm just at the beginning, by the way, of my acronym education, so I apologize if I say UFE or UFO when I really meant RFO or RFE. RFERL and VOA. The collaboration, actually, the best I think, picture of it. Ken and I were fortunate enough because of Miroslava, who was referenced earlier as the top anchor at our Ukraine service and who is arguably the most prominent journalist in Ukraine, helped us have an exclusive interview with the finance minister in Ukraine, who is a wonderful, fascinating woman who was educated in Chicago, was someone I was particularly interested in talking to because she was only on the job for about 2 months, and I thought she'd be, at least with us Americans, an honest broker of information walking in the door. She was more than that. But to the point of Ryan's question, on one side of me I had the lead team leader and lead journalist in country from RFE, and on the other side of me I had Miroslava, with Ken and I hanging out between the two of them, and their coordination on all of the content, the programming, the reporting, particularly in a war zone, was exemplary in my view. And I've seen a few of them in the past. I've seen internationally all the different kinds of fiefdoms that collide in these sorts of situations internally and in different news organizations, and you couldn't have wanted a better relationship between VOA and RFERL in my view. Secondly, to Matt's question, which one other thing that Ken, before I go around to Matt, one other thing that Ken, since Ken and I have an act that we've worked very carefully on refining in our Kiev, or Kyiv, for those of you who hadn't been to Kiev before, like I and Ken and I were practicing our pronunciations We hit Prague, and then we decided we were doing so well it was time for us to split up and regroup for our next opportunity together. And I hope to do that with many governors, because as Ken said, getting out there and seeing what's out there is it just gives you a picture and a narrative in your head that's remarkable and will help inform your judgment about the work that all of our colleagues are doing. But Ken raised the English language website or questions about the storytelling on the websites. That's one of my first happy introductions to the English team and what they're doing. And you touched on a tricky piece. The language services are not as nimble as we would like, getting the translations of the top stories that they've got quickly onto the English language website, which can be, I think, ever more influential, which is the purpose of this, than we have been. But it's an internal mechanical problem that can be solved in a number of different ways, not the least of which would be technologically. But there is manpower involved. There are resources involved in terms of getting translations. There are a variety of skills that are required for the site to be as good as we would want it to be, and really utilize the infrastructure that we're so heavily invested in. So that's a focus of mine walking in the door, and I hope to announce at the next board meeting. Rob Bowles working on this with me. Matthew Bays is in the middle of it, of course. How we're going to go, what the timetable is, how we're going to go forward with that site, and we hope to share more of that with you. Then just one last comment on Matt's strong point about the copyright issues as it relates to the content on the website. This bedevils every news organization that I've been in. The tagging, the detail work that goes into the clearances that are embedded in a lot of the good work that we'd like to share, but which is inhibited by these issues, conflicts. And there are a number of ways we can work them out a little bit better than we've had success doing. But first thing, David's response was, I think, the right one. It's a big challenge for all news organizations, I say, but we can get better clearances through AP and Reuters. Those negotiations are coming due in the next year, so there'll be opportunities to address those kinds of details in those discussions. I served on the board of the AP and Reuters in years past, so I know where they're coming from, which is generally, as David pointed out, looking for another dollar out of your pocket, and clearances generally come with a little more cash. I don't want to get ahead of my skis here, and if the AP guy who has called me repeatedly since I arrived is probably going to take this conversation around to their board and say, this guy I don't know. We've got a negotiation already and we haven't even begun. So, but we'll get there, and it's a very familiar challenge for news organizations that have the reach and have the infrastructure that U.S. international broadcasting has. But I appreciated the question. These are great questions for me. As I said, I'm a little nervous that these questions are getting a little too tough for what I would like to see at a board meeting. A few more softballs would be appreciated when I show up, just speaking as a journalist here amongst friends. Ted Lippian and I, by the way, as I look back here, I didn't know we had a Los Angeles bureau. I'm going to Los Angeles, I hope this weekend, so I look forward to visiting the LA bureau. But Ted, yeah, have you been? No. Okay, so we can make that little Saturday trip over. But I think Ted, who didn't say this, but I could feel. I fear Ted as well, let the record show. But I feel, in keeping with, and we've had some of these conversations amongst colleagues inside the building, San Francisco is the epicenter for innovation and technology, arguably in the world, but certainly in this country. And just looking at where we can get stronger, I think San Francisco would be a place that geographically, in the 21st century, offers some important considerations. We look around the world and decide where we want to be better positioned. That's my piece, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, and thanks all for the warm welcome I've gotten walking in the door. Thank you again.
Thanks, Mr. CEO. So just a couple last things before we adjourn. I will at some point stop showering praise on Andy, I promise, because he won't be able to take it. But a little kind of quick 30-second State of the Union here as far as my perspective on the BBG. I think that I've never felt better than I do today about where we are, which in the world that we live in is kind of a little bit ironic, given that the world's probably in a worse position from the perspective of press freedom and everything that we've been since I got here. A couple reasons. You've just seen a taste of Andy Lack. Andy Lack is we've known each other for a long time. He is a true icon in the news business. And frankly, the things that he can do in his first 5 minutes of every day, I'm not equipped to do. It's not something that I do, just meeting with journalists and looking at content. That's ultimately where the rubber meets the road. How we influence people is what we're putting out there and how we're putting it out there. And fixing the governance and the stuff that we've been working on structurally, while immense sometimes, is the easy part. Now it's onto the hard part. And having known Andy for as long as I have, we are incredibly fortunate to have him leading us. There's other couple of things we're fortunate with too. I think when the board set up, and it wasn't my idea, so I can praise the board for this, when we decided to name the interim management team to get us to Andy for the last year, we hope that it would also serve as kind of a stable management team that the eventual CEO can inherit, and that has worked tremendously well. And I just want to publicly acknowledge, Andre, Rob, and Susie, because they've gone from being leaders of this place to incredible lieutenants, and without them, I think we'd be in real bad shape. They've freed up Andy to go out and be able to do his due diligence, so they're working as hard as ever. I know how hard they're working, and so thank you guys for all the hard work. I also love the board that we have. We still have one seat open, so hopefully we'll be at full strength at some point. The board has not been at full strength in maybe almost a decade, or since Walter at least took the chairmanship. But it's not just that we're at full strength. We have an incredible mix of talents. Matt and Ryan and Ken have been working hard here for a year. We're joined now by Karen and Michael and Leon. Everybody has different strengths. Just in some of the meetings we have yesterday, it's just a true pleasure to have this group of people around the table with different strengths and comments. And I went to sleep last night with a grin on my face because of that. So thank you, new board members, and welcome. So I think we have a lot of challenges, and we're getting to the hard work now. But I actually think we're in a I'm not spinning. I think we're in a very good place as an agency to address the challenges we have, and we have the resources and the leadership to do that right now. And I'm for the first time since I've taken the chairmanship, I can sit here and say I feel really good about where we are today. On a negative note, I don't think we should end the meeting without acknowledging that the world lost two great journalists last week, and I think two close friends of our CEO, David Carr at the New York Times and Bob Simon at CBS. And we're journalists, and so it's ironic that at least Bob Simon lost his life on the West Side Highway when he's been into Afghanistan and in all sorts of crazy places around the world. It just goes to show you how unfair and ironic the world is. So condolences to Andy on loss of two friends, and just acknowledgement for these two great journalists that the world lost. So I just started with the negative and ended with the positive. But anyway, any other comments by any governors before we adjourn? Or I will entertain a motion to adjourn if any governor would like to put the motion forward. Matt, motions we adjourn. Any second? Come on. Okay. Michael Kepner gets in there for the second. All those in favor of adjourning the meeting? Aye. Any opposed? Ryan, thank you. And thank you for everybody who showed up today. And we'll see you guys all in April here at the Cohen Building.